Are you prepared to die? No, it's not Dark Souls, and it's not Bloodborne. It's Nioh. Probably never heard of that before, and neither had I until just recently. I'm Fox with FoxeoGames, and this is a Fox First Sent for the Nioh Alpha Demo on the PlayStation 4. So, they released the demo. It's a temporary thing, so you can only play it until May 5th, 2016, so by the time you watch this, that may be long since past. And I'm handling this using my Fox First Sent series because you can't really review a demo, much less an alpha demo. So Nioh is the romanization of those two Japanese characters you see, which means, I think, something like Benevolent King, if I'm not mistaken, although it's been a while since I've done much with my Japanese. And it's a third-person action RPG for the PlayStation 4. As of right now, I haven't seen anything that talked about it coming to other platforms. I think I saw it one time with the Only on PlayStation logo, so this may be a PlayStation 4 exclusive, but then again, some of those end up coming to the PC as well. And lately, we've had a lot of interesting Japanese games being announced for PC, like God Eater Burst, or at least God Eater Resurrection. So it was apparently announced a long time ago. I mean, we're talking like back in, 2004? And it's been in various stages of development for around 10 plus years. So, while it's really tired and overused refrain by this point, it's impossible for me to not compare this to the Souls series. If you guys take a look at this footage as I talk, just the background footage, there's just no question that there has to be some inspiration from the Souls series there. And as soon as you put your hands on that controller and start playing, you're going to see it. There's a ton of it. Now, this is a different game from that series for sure, but it clearly borrows very heavily from the Souls series. I mean, you perform a variety of attacks. There's like a strong attack, faster attacks, although there are stances, which is interesting. The different stances put you in different combat modes, so you may put more focus towards hard attacks, hard-hitting attacks, or shift more towards really fast attacks that don't do as much sort of like poise damage, don't stagger enemies as easily. You can equip and switch between two weapons at once, just like Demon Souls and Dark Souls. You can dash around, you can hold the dash button to allow you to run, and all of these actions use up your ki, which is just this game's version of stamina. It's a name swap. You can equip several pieces of armor as well as 2 accessories, and you're able to assign a couple of items to quick slots for easy use during combat. And you can also drink an elixir to heal you, and every time you rest or pray at the little shrine thingy, it actually restores your elixir to 3, at least it did for me. Now, this is an alpha demo, so some of this stuff may be put in here because it's a demo. We don't know how much of this is going to make it into the final build. So I don't know for 100% sure, but it did look like the elixir was refillable. Once you ran out, it actually disappeared from my quick slot bar. It just disappeared, so that's why I thought it was just a regular consumable. But as soon as I went back to the little shrine and did the prayer, I got 3 more elixirs. I did seem to pick some up as I went through. I don't know if there's a limit, but I did get 3 each time I return. You can also toss rocks at enemies to get their attention, just like in Bloodborne. And you can throw this game's version of fire bombs, which look strikingly familiar to the fire bombs from the Souls series, or Soulsborne series if we're going to include Bloodborne. There are also bows for long-range combat, which makes sense because where Nioh really stands out is in the setting. It's roughly modeled after like 17th century feudal Japan, albeit with numerous fantasy elements, like magic and little green creatures called kodama. And when you rescue them, they return to your little prayer shrine where you can then kind of, not equip them, but set them as a blessing. And they do different things like increase a certain drop rate of this or a certain drop rate of that. Weapons, armor pieces, buildings, enemy designs. All of these things really do follow that feudal Japan aesthetic, and I think it's actually pretty cool. The game was a bit dark, in my opinion. I felt like I couldn't see as much as I wanted to because the game was just so dark, and we'll talk more about some performance issues. You knew I was going to get to that. This is a FoxeoGames video, guys. I'm mainly a PC gamer. I can't help it. I always talk about the frame rate. Now there's samurai-like armor and weapons that kind of dominate your equipment selection. You've got, your spears, katanas, other weapons that are based roughly off the katana. There's a whole bunch of names for these different kinds of blades, and they vary ever so slightly that, to most of us that don't have a particular interest in Japanese swords, then you wouldn't even know what the difference was. They all just look like regular katanas to you. The enemies do look like feudal Japanese warriors. They also wear, let me just pronounce it the American way, samurai-like armor, I'm so used to the Japanese pronunciations of these things, but I'll try to do it the American way. And many of the beasts in the game, the tougher enemies, are actually modeled after Japanese oni, which is roughly translated to demon. Although the way their culture works, the way their fables and stories work, there's no direct comparison to what we would say is demon. Japanese oni is a Japanese oni. It is its own thing. It's best just to kind of read up on the stories. Even in English, it'll work, and you get an idea of what they are. Just calling them demons doesn't quite get it, but it's the closest thing we have in English. Now, like I said, you don't rest at a bonfire like you do in Dark Souls, but you do pray at a small little shrine, and it's pretty much the same thing in many ways. This is where you can level up, you can choose a blessing, you can pick your spirit guardian, which changes some different things, like reduces the amount of ki that you use when you're rolling, or does a bunch of other little effects. When I looked at it, there were 4. I don't know if you have 4 by default through the whole game, or if you pick up more or have to find them, who knows. And there are a few other things you can do, not the least of which is to summon other players. You see where I'm going with this, guys? It's impossible not to think about the Souls series. Basically, you put down a little bowl, and it starts the summoning process. Now, I actually left there and walked away, and I thought, oh, well, I didn't get anybody. I sat there with the little animation going for about a minute. Nothing happened, so I left. What I didn't realize is, unless you specifically tell it to stop, it's going to keep looking for somebody. So as I'm just progressing through the level, all of a sudden, this gold kind of gold highlighted character came around the corner, and I started clicking, the lock on, because there is a lock on in the game, just like Dark Souls, to lock on to him, and I realized he wasn't an enemy. And when I looked at the name, well, it was pretty clear that's not a name that the developers would have given a character in the game. So this was another player. I think I connected with a total of 2, maybe 3 players. At one point I tried to connect, and after about 20 minutes of trying, just nothing happened. But the good news is, you don't actually have to do anything other than put the bowl down at the shrine and leave it, and then it'll keep trying until it finds somebody. Now, you level up by acquiring what I'm assuming is pronounced the Japanese way, which is AMIRITA, which is basically the same as Souls. It's virtually the same. I wasn't able to purchase anything with it, but you do level up, and you have standard stats like strength, dexterity, stat for your health. I think it was called like body, spirit, a couple other things. There is apparently magic in the game. I didn't actually get to the point to use any. Another thing that sets it apart from the Souls series is that you can actually choose combos, or sort of level up combos with another kind of currency that's like the AMIRITA. And then when you set those up, you have to follow through with a button combination. So I thought it was just something where, oh, I'll pick this and my character will automatically do this new move. No, you actually have to, if I'm not mistaken, you actually have to hit the buttons in the right order. If it's like the square button and then the triangle, or square, square, triangle. So that's interesting. I never actually got around to using any of them because I didn't actually learn any of the combo moves. But it does look like something that might be difficult to pick up on, because it would be easy to forget what your combos are, especially in the heat of battle. And speaking about the heat of battle, holy crikey, is this game difficult. Wow, I mean, I played Demon Souls, Dark Souls 2, Bloodborne, and Dark Souls 3. And I played Dark Souls on New Game Plus many times. And I just, wow. Nioh is a brutally, punishingly, hardcore, difficult game. I mean, where you start out is on a beach. It looks like you just got off a boat. You have nothing but clothes, no weapon, no armor. So I'm assuming, and you look to be very low level, so I'm assuming this is actually where the game starts. It's not just the alpha demo starting point. It looks like the actual start of the game. And once you find the first weapon and jump into it, which the first weapon's a type of katana, wow, I got killed by the first enemy several times. If you go in and just mash the button, you will just die. If you go in there and try to just roll around haphazardly, you will die. I'm not really sure if there are iframes or invincibility frames during a roll, but I sure got hit during rolls a lot. So I think you actually have to dodge the attack, not actually dodge through it, although I'm not 100% sure, because one of the problems I ran into was the frame rate. We'll get to that in just a minute. But even after throwing myself against these enemies in the beginning area, going back and then picking up the I don't know what you would call it in the game. It's kind of like the bloodstain from Souls games. You actually go back and pick up the AMIRITA currency, or like your experience points, when they drop on the ground after you die. And I finally collected enough to level up, so I leveled up quite a bit. I got some better armor that dropped from enemies, or stuff that you pick up. It looks like those little soul items on the ground that you pick up, just like in the Soul series. And still, I was getting killed, like, all the time, and many of these enemies would kill me in just a couple hits. I mean, some of them could combo me from full health to dead, just like that. Boom, dead. And what I noticed is, if I got 2 enemies on me at once, especially in the beginning of the game, I mean, that was it. I learned to just run away until I could separate them, because 2 enemies is pretty much instant death. I've since learned how to handle it a little bit better, but still, you really want to go 1-on-1. 2-on-1 maybe, but any more than 2, and you're probably going to die, or at least have to use a lot of your elixir to heal up. Now, there were some especially difficult beasts in the game, which, like I said, are modeled after the Japanese Oni, the demon-like creatures. And they were on another level of difficulty. I had no idea that they were going to kill me as many times as they did. I barely got this guy like maybe to 3/4 of his health before he'd kill me. So I threw myself at it again and again, and I just couldn't do it, because no matter how hard I hit him, with like the biggest hammer weapon I had, put in the hardest hitting stance that I had, with the hard hitting attack, he would still just basically poise through it. He wouldn't be staggered. It seemed like virtually nothing could stagger him. And he moved fast. Like, these dudes are pretty brutish. They're big. They look kind of like they're lumbering brutes, but no, they move fast. They move like ninjas, basically, which makes sense. We're in Japan, after all. So those were really tough, and the only way I was ultimately able to get past the first one is when I just happened to get a summon. And after that, I think I got some more confidence in. I did eventually kill, I think, 2 of them by myself, and then a 4th one with a summon, if I'm not mistaken. But generally, I just found myself running away from them, and then trying to get my bearings together and move back into it. And usually, even if I did kill them, I used all 3 of my elixirs, if not 4 or 5, if I had that many at the time. As for the level design, it is incredibly Souls-like. Basically, level starts out, there's the horizontal level, and it also goes up vertically as well. So you got that, what we like to call verticality to it. It goes up and down. It's not just a flat horizontal plane that you move across. There's definitely something more going on in terms of moving up and down. You can climb up ladders or climb down ladders, jump down to areas from higher areas. You can find secrets by running up a little hill and jumping down to an area that you couldn't get to otherwise. I wasn't able to jump in the game. I don't think there is a jump, actually, but you could run around on, say, for example, rooftops. One of the rooftops actually caved in. I fell in, and then there were a bunch of enemies that surrounded me, and I somehow survived all 3 enemies. I don't know how. I think it was a miracle. And also, you can open up shortcuts. In one case, you can actually kick a ladder down, which should be familiar to Souls fans. In another case, you could open a door from another side, and if you approach it from the first side that you first see it at, it'll say the door does not open from this side. So that should seem very familiar to all of us that have played the Souls series. And one of those is right at one of your respawn shrines. Oh, did I mention that you respawn at these shrines that you pray at? If you die, you respawn there. You can also change your guardian and all that other stuff that we talked about, but primarily it's the purpose of those is to set up your respawn points. So reaching a new one is the ultimate bit of progress, because now you can restart if you die at that newer one further on in the game. I don't know if there will be any warping. I don't know if you'll be able to go back to other places without having to travel all the way back, or if there is backtracking. I have no clue on that, but there was quite a lot to explore of the parts of the demo that I played. I didn't get all the way to the end because it's really difficult, and I needed to take a break, and I've been super busy at work. But your Souls experience will definitely kick in, and you'll start dodging and rolling around and trying to time your attacks appropriately. And each weapon has unique timing for the most part. There are weapon types that are very similar. The same type of katana is going to move the same, but then you've got an axe or a big hammer or the spear or the bow. All of these things, you have to time them differently, because you can't fight the same way with your big hammer that you could with your tiny little katana. It won't work. You'll just get hit all the time because you didn't time it properly. But I found the easiest way to play it for me was to pick the largest, heaviest hitting weapon that I had, and then sort of time my hard-hitting, powerful stance attacks so that I could stagger most enemies. And I would do these little combos, back up, you know, get my stamina back, which is called ki, and then move back in. There are a couple other interesting things about it, in that when you, we talked about it earlier, you rescue these little guys, these little green guys called Kodama, which look like something out of maybe like a Miyazaki anime, which is not the Miyazaki of the Soul series, but the Miyazaki of Studio Ghibli, which I think he's Miyazaki as well, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think his name is also Miyazaki. People will talk about, well, is it better than Dark Souls? No, we're not going to get into that because that's a whole other story. I'm not really going to compare it on that level. But I did notice that it is incredibly and even kind of unnecessarily gory. Like when I killed a lot of the enemies, they would just fall apart suddenly. Like limbs would come off, heads would come off, and I guess that's okay if it makes sense, if it's part of the combo. But it was just as if, oh, now he's dead, he's just gonna suddenly come apart. I didn't really feel like that made much sense, and it just sort of pulled me out of the experience. I'd rather they not do that. It did seem a bit gruesome and overdone. It felt quite unnecessary, to be honest. But I mean, it wasn't a big deal. It just kind of caught me off guard. There are plunge attacks, which I tested out one time and completely missed the enemy, at which point he killed me. Like I said, the elixir restored at the spawn point for me, but I'm not 100% sure if it's going to actually do that in the end game. I imagine it will, but at the same time, I was able to either pick up some elixirs or get more somehow as I went through the level, because at one point I think I had 5, even though you only start with 3 after you respawn. And now let's get to the big issue that I had with the demo, which also gets to one of the most interesting things about the demo. When you first start, you have 2 choices as for the game mode. The first one is movie mode, which says that it stabilizes the resolution, and the other one's called action mode, which says that it stabilizes the frame rate. Well, the first one's correct in that, I mean, it stabilizes the resolution. You can play at full 1920 by 1080, but the second one's incorrect in that it does not stabilize the frame rate. I played the entire thing for the most part, other than a little tiny bit. I played all of it in action mode because I'd rather have a better frame rate, and the frame rate was better, but actually not by that much. The 1920 by 1080 never seemed to exceed 30 frames per second, but if you went into the action mode, it actually scaled it down to what appeared to be 720p or close to it, and then you could get up to 60 frames per second, but most of the time I was well below that. And in fact, in order to get the best performance, I actually found I had to go into the system settings on the PlayStation 4 and change my resolution to 720p, because it wouldn't seem to ever really reach 60 FPS unless I actually switched the whole console to 720p. When I was playing at 1080p, even when I set it to action mode, it never really hit 60. I mean, I can kind of tell when we're at 60 and it's smooth, but the problem with the Nioh Alpha Demo, it was not smooth, guys. It was all over the place. I mean, I think you might even have a better experience just picking the movie mode, because the frame rate may be more stabilized in that. It'll never exceed 30, not that I saw. But the problem with the action mode is you can go all the way from a very smooth 60 to clearly below 30, and then back up to 60, and just spinning the camera around can go radically in one way or the other. I mean, we're talking like a difference of maybe like 40 frames per second. That's just way too much. So I'd rather have a more stable frame rate than have it go all over the place like that. So performance was a big issue. Again, it's an alpha demo, so maybe things will be better when we get the full version. But as we've seen, these companies tend to favor better visuals, and in that regard, they tend to give frame rate the shaft, and frame rate ends up taking a nosedive. Most games will aim for 30 max, which, in my opinion, 30 is the bare minimum to play the game, not the max. It should always be 60 for an action game. I mean, other games, that's fine, but a game like this needs to be 60. As for the control, for the most part, it felt really similar to Dark Souls or Bloodborne. More Dark Souls than Bloodborne. But the biggest problem I had with it is it felt a little bit more like Dark Souls 2 than Dark Souls or Dark Souls 3 or Demon Souls, in that if you pushed back on the stick to move while locked on, you would actually face away from the enemy oftentimes, especially if you rolled or if you pushed in one direction while attacking while locked on, if you just happen to push the analog stick, you'll attack in the direction you're pushing, not in the direction you're locked on. At least that's what happened to me. Now, I haven't used all the different weapons to see if different weapons operate differently, but that was the biggest issue I had. It felt really inconsistent. The control didn't feel very tight. It felt like it was a little bit loose, and yes, it did feel a little bit floaty at times. How does it compare to, say, for example, Dark Souls 2? Well, I would say it's about on par with that sort of feeling. Like you don't always feel like you're directly connected to the character in terms of what the character's doing and what you're doing with the controller. Hopefully they tighten that up, but regardless, after playing it for a while, I went back and forth. I started out with, whoa, this is way too difficult, the controls are just not that great, I don't think I'll be interested in this, to once I started being successful, especially after I got that summon and I started picking up on it, I was like, wow, this is really cool, I like the aesthetic, it feels a little bit different, it's kind of like the Souls experience, but not so much like it that it feels like it's a total ripoff. It's got a totally different aesthetic. Then I go back to dying constantly over and over again, and I'd get ambushed by 3 or 4 enemies, and you know, the camera would be all over the place or get caught in a corner, and I'd be like, oh, this is frustrating, the controls are bad. So I was here and there, back and forth with it. I think definitely I'll at least purchase it at some point. I don't know if I'll get it brand new, but I'll wait and see what happens. Hopefully if they can stabilize that frame rate and get a pretty consistent 60 and not drop below 40 at the lowest, hopefully, at 720p, then I would pick that mode and play it. You should definitely check it out. If it is before May 5th, 2016, and you have a PlayStation 4, I would definitely download this and give it a shot. If you like the Souls series or third-person action games, I will say this, though. It is brutally difficult. It is really, really difficult. I mean, it's beyond the Souls series difficult in many ways, in my opinion. I certainly died a lot more in this game than I did in any of the Souls games, even when I was new to the Souls games, in terms of the amount of time I spent with it. There are a lot of other things I could say about it, but, you know, we're over 20 minutes for this Fox First Scent, and what's my first scent on this one? Well, I don't know, I'm kind of here and there, back and forth. I would say try out the demo and see what you think, and then I'm definitely going to keep an eye on this one, because like I said, I like the aesthetic, and if they tighten up the controls and increase the performance and get that frame rate stabilized, no question in my mind, I'll enjoy playing it. As for what the rest of the game will show us, who knows? That was just a Nioh Alpha Demo. And apparently, from what I've heard, if you complete the Nioh Alpha Demo, or most of it, or all of it, not 100% sure on this, apparently you might get something that you can get some sort of downloadable content when you buy the full game. A lot of demos do this. This is what I've been told. I haven't confirmed it myself, obviously, but you can look it up. I am Fox with FoxeoGames. Have you played the Nioh Alpha Demo on the PlayStation 4, and if so, what do you think of it? Make sure to rate the video, like it if you liked it, dislike it if you disliked it, subscribe if you haven't already, check the video description for Twitter, Facebook, and all that other good stuff, and I will see you guys next time.